Today, we are covering the emotional drivers behind diabetes. As I'm sure that you're aware, there are traditionally two types of diabetes, type 1 and type 2. With type 1, the pancreas does not produce insulin because the individual's immune system attacks the cells that would be potentially making the insulin. For this reason, it's believed that type 1 diabetes can be classified as an autoimmune reaction. In type 1, this diagnosis is typically associated with younger people. With type 2 diabetes, the pancreas can and has produced healthy amounts of insulin in the past, but over time, the body has become resistant to the insulin that is being produced. And the pancreas will try to compensate by producing more insulin. But because the body's unable to effectively use that insulin, glucose accumulates in the bloodstream. And that is not good. Welcome back to the Mind Change Podcast. I'm your host, Heather McKean. Please take a moment to like, subscribe, and download. It really helps us continue to create all this great free content for you and others. So from a metaphysical perspective, the differences in these two types give us a few clues when we're talking about emotional drivers. First, a little disclaimer. If you are not well-versed in a metaphysical approach to wellness, the things that I'm about to talk about might seem a little far out or woo-woo. Now, I assure you, they are not. They're actually ancient understandings that have been lost as the tide has drastically shifted toward a more medicalized outlook on health. Also, I have stated many times that I rarely speak about the emotional drivers behind childhood illness and disease. And that's because I have found that it can be particularly triggering for parents. I mean, we're already living in a very blame-oriented society, and guilt, shame, and blame are valuable currency in our current market. And I find that it's difficult for parents to separate emotional feedback that a child's body might be carrying from feeling like that parent is somehow at fault for what is being manifested. That being said, type 1 diabetes is very commonly diagnosed in children. And so to accurately represent the drivers for that condition, I will need to speak to some of the unique drivers in a young person's mind and body. So a couple of things to understand. Remember that the mind-body connection is very metaphoric. Insulin production is tied to emotional nurturing. Now, we commonly associate insulin with sugar, and then sugar with sweetness. So often, our body's relationship with sugar can be very metaphoric for our mind's view on how sweet or nurturing or comforting the world and our relationships in it are. Now, it's important to realize that children are often carrying a lot of ancestral load. Remember, we know from the study of epigenetics that trauma that isn't processed and released from the body can be passed down genetically up to 3 generations. It's very common for a child to be representing not only their own environment in their body, but that of the generations that came before them. Now, this isn't the case with every child, but some children are more open to receiving those ancestral messages and generational things than other children. So with type 1 diabetes, let's dive into some of the most common emotional drivers. Now, overall, what we can understand is there are deep, unresolved trauma in the ancestral line. Also present along with that is very commonly a pattern of lack or not enough. There's not enough money, there's not enough food, not enough love, not enough opportunity, not enough support. Could be any number of things. But the idea is that they live in and exist in a world of abundance, but that somehow they uniquely are on the outside of it. It's kind of that, well, everyone else has blah, 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 but not me, or not my family, right? Now, this also often can result in a deep-rooted belief that there's something wrong with them. Like if the perception is, this is out there for everyone else in the world and everyone else seems to get it, but not me, then from a child's perspective, that only can mean one thing, that they don't get it because there's something wrong with them. Now, this could have gotten started, if we're talking about ancestry, this could have started somewhere in the ancestral line through war or starvation or various forms of oppression. So instead of processing it, they internalized it. And oftentimes with oppression, they don't have an opportunity to process it. Even if they had the skills to process it, they wouldn't be necessarily in a framework to do so. I think a great example of this on both sides is the Holocaust and the concentration camps. I've spoken about it many times before. And that's where we get a lot of actually our epigenetic testing, is that in the children and even grandchildren of Holocaust survivors, they began to see diseases and ailments that should have been or could have been associated with the people that were in the concentration camps, but rather they're seeing it in their children or grandchildren. That being one of those very oppressive, traumatic situations that would have been difficult to process at the time. But on the other hand, we see someone like Viktor Frankl, who wrote the book Man's Search for Meaning, who he did process it. He processed it well. And he did a lot of very intentional things that helped process that experience out of his mind and body. And he very much feels like he took from it. Not saying that something horrible didn't happen, but the way that he processed it and internalized it had a very profound and positive effect on him. But for those who it doesn't, and it's not processed, and it's actually rather internalized to the point where it becomes part of their identity. In effect, they believe that there's no sweetness or sustenance or support left in the world for them. Maybe that's because it was stolen from them by those who did have, right? So that idea of not enough is part of the then identity. It becomes family stories, it becomes cultural stories, it becomes narratives that get passed down. And so that idea of not having enough or not being good enough is what actually gets passed down. So before it actually manifests into full-blown type 1 diabetes, it might have shown up generationally as people who struggled to find joy and happiness in life. They are people that may have been known to be somber or serious. They may have been people who sort of worked a martyr program or pattern in their life, or internalized that hardship or struggle was just part of life and it became an identity. And what happens as that progresses and generation after generation does this, then we could see that maybe anger becomes very prevalent. We can see that family members become cynical or bitter and eventually become emotionally distant. So over time and over generations, as you could probably see, that takes a major toll on the pancreas that produces and supports us with insulin or with the sweetness of our life. And that all of those things are very tied into our neurotransmitter production, which can result in us having those feelings of joy and happiness and connection. If those things are in decline generationally, then we will definitely see that start to physically take a toll on the generations after. Now, remember, type 1 diabetes can be also known as an autoimmune disorder. Now, autoimmune disorders are often very metaphoric for being at war with oneself, which makes complete sense if the ancestry believes that they are somehow uniquely on the outside of all good things. So if this condition generationally or ancestrally lands with a child, then they're unknowingly carrying these burdens, right? And it's not that they produce these symptoms of being maybe somber or that the world is against them, but those are being internalized and are showing up in this relationship with the pancreas. Now, oftentimes with type 1 diabetes, the onset and then subsequent diagnosis seems very sudden, but likely that child did have something that happened that triggered this. So likely the child witnessed an event. This is where it can be very tricky because oftentimes what they witness to most people might just be mildly upsetting or disruptive. Like it could be an accident, a car accident, or even a physical accident, even a crash on the bike, which is so common in childhood, right? Or they could have witnessed an argument between their parents, or they could have been bullied or been witness to bullying or something like that. Again, these are things that under normal conditions, quote unquote normal conditions, it wouldn't be just mildly upsetting or disruptive. But for the child that is carrying all of this ancestral or generational trauma, it actually triggers a landslide of cellular memories. And then the body begins attacking itself. Now, metaphorically, it is not meaning to attack the child, but it's after, and what it's trying to attack and kill off, if you will, what it's at war with is the memories and the ancestral pain. But to the body, they seem one and the same. All right, so in our work in Mind Change, we've witnessed major improvements in insulin production and the reduction in antibodies being produced when the ancestral traumas, core beliefs, and patterns are addressed and rewired. Now, let's transition and talk about type 2 diabetes. There are similarities in some of the drivers, but it's usually contained to the client's own life experiences. Not that ancestry isn't at play here too, because this condition is developed over time, and it can be very strongly linked to diet and lifestyle. We sometimes will see different correlations. So in type 2 diabetes, usually we see this as an adult onset. And also it's quite typical that obesity is a comorbidity with type 2 diabetes. Now, a typical driver for type 2 is growing up in a family where support and nurturing were in that kind of feast or famine mentality, meaning the emotional stability of the home environment was unstable. So as a child, the way that gets perceived is they actually become uncertain who is safe. So let me give you an example. Let's say you've got a home where the father, for various reasons, and maybe again this is part of the genetic or ancestral disposition, is someone who tends to emote angrily. And so when stress happens in his life, he tends to emote and deal with that through anger. And that anger for a child can obviously feel very threatening and very frightening. So then maybe you have a mother who is a little more soft-spoken and maybe also is subservient to the anger, who maybe has learned to keep that relationship copacetic just to not make dad angry. So mom kind of goes quiet, or stays busy, or does something so that the anger isn't flared up. Now, how does the child perceive this? The child's system is just wired for safety, and they literally need to be aligned with their parents on a primal level to feel safe. So this is the brain development of a child. So they need to stay connected to dad, and they need to stay connected to mom. And yet mom and dad are doing versions of safety very different. Mom goes quiet, dad emotes angrily. So the child is trying to figure out which one of these is safe. And there's discomfort probably with both of them, right? I don't want to be like dad because dad makes me feel this way, and the anger is scary. I don't like the anger. And I look at what it does to me and look at what it does to mom. And yet then we look at mom, and mom has gone silent and mom's gone quiet. And of course, this is just one of a million different ways that this can be processed. But the child looks at that and says, but she's not okay either. So in this balance of trying to find what's safe, who is safe, they are really finding themselves in a bit of a stuck place or situation. This could also be represented in conflict between parents. So oftentimes, if the child felt attacked in the home environment, and this could have been even just being in the middle of, maybe the mom doesn't go quiet, maybe the mom attacks back, or maybe vice versa. And so, or in the anger, they attack the child verbally. That's an opportunity too there for the child to feel like that love and that nurturing that they need is not there. And in fact, something else is there instead. And also, as we well know, unfortunately, this also could be physical. This could be physical attack, but equally damaging would be the emotional attacking that can be name calling or belittling or demeaning. It doesn't even have to be directly to the child. It could be from one parent to another child, and the child's associating that. So what this does is this sets them up to begin searching for sweetness or comfort in other areas, and commonly that gets associated with food. Because sugar can often accompany a huge surge in dopamine and oxytocin, which are neurotransmitters that are produced when we are in safe, loving relationships, then children begin settling for these synthetic spikes to offset the pain that's being felt in the home environment. And unwittingly and unknowingly, as parents, we often support this by giving children sweeties when there's been some sort of conflict, or we feel sorry, or something negative has happened. We then give some form of sweet to make up for. What we do not understand that this is doing is linking for the child, finding comfort in not necessarily their parent processing with them, or validating, or explaining, or repairing, but in the artificial spike of those hormones or neurotransmitters through sugar, through food. Unfortunately, the synthetic versions are nothing like the actual versions that come from safe, connected, and regulated attachment with a loved one, and they will need it refilled quicker. It doesn't stick around. They have very short lifetime. Sugar has a very short lifetime of those neurotransmitters. Another driver, it's also common for these people, type 2 diabetes, to be people who self-sabotage in many areas of their life. Subconsciously, what we don't understand is that it helps keep them in alignment with the way they felt as children. Now that seems counterintuitive, like we do not want to stay in alignment with the way we felt as children, but it becomes kind of a vicious cycle in the area of self-control and oftentimes around food, right? Because if as children they became reliant on that food-based or synthetic version of the dopamine and oxytocin, they need an excuse to seek out those synthetic spikes that they receive from the sugar. So without thinking, this is not conscious processing, this is subconscious processing. Remember, the body's just trying to get us what we need. So as an excuse, they sabotage to stay connected to the truth that they heard from a parent or a major influence as a child. It's not really the truth, but the truth that they began to believe that there was maybe something wrong with them, right? Or some of those demeaning things that were said. These people often tend to feel overly stressed and out of control, and they're success avoidant because deep down there are feelings that they're not good enough or that they don't actually deserve real connected love. These people can often feel victimized. A common thing is, well, it's because of you or X, Y, and Z that I'm this way or that I'm in this situation. They blame and push people away for fear of getting hurt. But what they're desperately actually seeking is the love that they were missing in childhood. Again, this commonly results in being powerfully drawn to sweets or complex carbohydrates because of that quick fix. And so eventually the body makes less and less natural insulin. And metaphorically, in a way, it's giving up on oneself that we're ever going to be enough. Now, this can be tough because these people will often project an outward appearance of being happy and fulfilled, but deep inside, they hunger for something more real and substantial. Now, contrary to popular belief, both of these conditions, type 1 and type 2 diabetes, can be improved. And as with most conditions, as we say here at Mind Change, the way out is to go in. Go inside the brain, where all of this has been programmed and coded by all of the input we have received, genetically and in our own lives. If we change the input, the output will naturally follow. It is time to heal the lack mentality and return to a state of joyful abundance. This can bring back all the natural sweetness that we have in life and in the world. Okay, I look forward to seeing you every other week as we dive into this fascinating topic. Please make sure to leave those written reviews on your 5-star reviews. And also, please go to our YouTube channel to comment on a disease, symptom, or ailment that you would like to hear covered in deeper depth in one of our upcoming podcast episodes. Okay, until next time, thanks for joining us on the Mind Change podcast, where we are changing the world, one mind at a time.